This internet sphere of gaming is awful and I want off. It doesn't stop, it just keeps spinning, and as it keeps spinning you notice that the people you see are different, but what they're saying stays the exact same. I remember everyone used to make videos where they'd yell about how Modern Warfare sucks and Doom was much better, in between skits where they'd fight an evil version of themselves for like 15 minutes. Hey y'all, it's Big Fat. But now, it's pretty much the same, except people are yelling about how Fortnite sucks and Modern Warfare was much better, in between moments where they'll randomly zoom in on someone's face. So back when I was like 3 years old, I noticed this trend and I decided to grow up playing just complete shit. I played Fightbox, Smarty's Meltdown, Aragon, Fantastic Four, The Chronicles of Narnia, Coraline, Futurama. This is what you might know as the Golden Age. Through this though, I realised that when you know these games as games rather than random boxes on a charity shop shelf, you realise that, dear God, someone put time into these. See, you might know the development cycle of something like Halo or Resident Evil 2, but what about games like Afro Samurai 2, which left this pretty big project with less than 10 developers? Or the tons of multiplayer failures of this generation like Evolve or Battleborn, which had a huge journey just to end up in a bargain bin. One of these games is Too Human, which you probably didn't even know existed, but even this had a huge development of 9 years. 9 years of changes and updates that all led to a really nice box, which I can put on my shelf and say, wow, Rayman Origins. Also, I forgot to write a transition for this bit, so I feel I have to do this because I played through the whole thing, but I don't think this part of the video is going to last very long because this game's just kind of nothingy. You see this especially in the story because like just nothing happens. I'm gonna summarise every event in the plot here, which completely spoils it, and here's a time if you want to skip, but don't, like, just don't, there's no point. Right, Baldur comes back to life, and then he takes the arm of Grendel, he goes away, then comes back again and kills Grendel to study its race, and then he goes away again, learns that Hod killed his wife, so he kills Hod and takes the, like, his eye recorder thing, and then he goes away again and is told a weapon of mass destruction is loose, so he goes to stop it, but Loki gets it, and now he's like, you know, a big, tough guy. So they go to kill Loki, but Loki leaves, so Baldur kills Loki's daughter, who tells Baldur that his wife was not killed by Hod, but committed suicide because she thought Baldur was dead. A ghost of Baldur's wife shows up, so Baldur's sword kills her, and he tells off the sword, like it's a dog or something. I don't, that never happens in any other bit of the game. Then lastly, Baldur sees that Hod was being manipulated through that eye thing, and we see Loki on another planet setting up the sequel. I know that seems like a lot when you hear it in one go, but spread it over 13 hours and it feels like nothing. Like, there's this huge world they seem to have built, but you never get an insight into that world or anything. The plot is just you playing fetch for 13 hours, you know, it ends up being, Grendel is bad, okay, it kills Grendel. A Hod is bad, alright, kills Hod. A weapon of mass destruction is loose, okay, sets Loki free. Loki is bad, okay, kills Loki's daughter, and that's it, that's the whole game. And the annoying thing is though is that, like, I don't hate the plot. There were a few lines that I thought were kind of funny, some intentional, some not, and like it has kind of interesting ideas. When you kill Hod, you take this PlayStation iToy and it shows that he wasn't seeing the real world and he didn't know what he was doing. That's kind of cool, that could lead to something. The Aesir exist to kind of bring humans back to humanity, which could be cool, but I don't know what they're fighting against. It could be like a commentary on how humans are changing the natural world, or it could just be ripping off The Matrix or Star Wars or something, I don't know. I can't complain about the plot being bad or not because I don't know if it's bad, but like, I don't know if it's good either. This was originally going to be part of a trilogy, which, like, I'll talk about more in a bit, but that's the reason the story is so against finishing anything or having anything happen in the first place. It's waiting. I think I mentioned Final Fantasy VII Remake in my last video, and since then I finished it. Well done me.
Woo.
Thank you. Everyone cheer, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well
Thank
done.
you. Thank you.
You did it.
But
Wow.
it's kind of similar in that it is the
Woo.
first part of an ongoing story, but like,
Yes.
the thing is that things
Whoa.
happen in it. You see the world, characters are introduced, changed and removed, and things happen, and so while I still really want the second part, I want it because I've gotten into it and I want it to continue. With Too Human though, it's more like I want it because I'm interested and I want the story to start. This doesn't feel like a complete story which will be added to later, it feels like the first act of one story. I'm pretty convinced this didn't need to be a trilogy and you could have put the entire story in one game, but as it stands it's nothingy. There's not enough here to be good, but I feel weird calling it bad because I don't dislike what's here. And it's kind of the same for the gameplay, it's nothingy. It's kind of an ARPG, you go through dungeons collecting loot like Diablo or Path of Exile, but it has more of a focus on action-based combat rather than the RPG-ish combat of those games. This means upgrading your character is fairly linear and you can't customize insane builds where enemies die just because you walked past them or something. However, this is supposedly swapped out for more flashy and reaction-based combat, which might be more satisfying for some, and the ARPG aspect comes from a variety of interesting weapons and abilities you can use. This heavier focus on the action of ARPG is something you see a lot of nowadays with games like Borderlands and Destiny, and to give the game credit, I think most ARPGs were more focused on the RPG part of ARPGs back then. I'm not huge on these games, so I might be forgetting a game that did this, but I at least can't think of a mainstream game that did it before this. However, there are reasons it didn't catch on, like Borderlands. The combat's not good. It's, again, very nothingy. Basically, it's kind of like Devil May Cry in that you use both melee and guns together. You can even use the juggling of Devil May Cry, however, there are less combos and options in the middle of combat. In fact, you're really lacking in options. This game doesn't actually use the right stick for the camera, that's all done automatically with a button to recenter it, like in Ape Escape. Though recentering the camera is really weird, it just jumps behind you. It doesn't swing like an actual camera, it's a bit... ugh. The right stick is actually used for attacking enemies. You point the stick in the direction of an enemy and you will attack that enemy. This is the aspect of the game I see criticised the most. A lot of people seem to think it's what makes the game bad, but honestly, I think they're talking shit. It's not great, it can take a little adjusting to, and because you're locking onto an enemy for melee, your momentum from moving is lost when attacking, which can make it feel clunky, but it's perfectly playable. The alternative would have been button mashing, which would have been tiring with the amount of combat there is. That sounds kind of pathetic, like, oh, I'm too tired from button mashing, I'm sorry. Like, no, it's genuinely a bit much though. Like, most of this game is combat, so I think pressing the button over and over again would just be, I don't know, I feel like it would just get sore or something. If you disagree with me, then play Too Human and prove me wrong. I think this choice would have made more sense if the game was isometric, but it doesn't bother me that much personally. One of the things I don't like about the combat is that this is it. You hold the right stick down and attack enemies. For hours. You can shoot where you hold the trigger for ages, and there's also a few special moves, but they restore quickly enough that you don't really think about it. The combat ends up just being you holding a button. For some enemies you can dodge, however a lot of their patterns are so random, it's like impossible to dodge it properly. There was this one bit where I was faced with a large group of these soldiers who just shot me over and over, and I couldn't do anything apart from die and come back. I died like 7 times before I finished that encounter with just some random enemies. And you might think that sounds really frustrating since you can't do anything, but when you die, nothing happens. You're brought back a few meters from where you died, with all the enemies who were killed still dead, and with the enemies who were hurt still damaged. it looks like there isn't a consequence for death, and for ages I didn't think there was. I just assumed you could barge through the game and die with no consequence. Not sure whether this was a bizarre detail the devs forgot or something. But then, 8 hours into the game, I got a tutorial pop up saying, oh, by the way, your equipment is damaged when you die, and it is. They're right, it is damaged, but barely. I think the fact I didn't notice this until the game told me over halfway through it kind of shows that this isn't really a punishment. Repairing equipment can be done at any time, it doesn't cost much, and dying only damages it a little bit, it doesn't break it. Are you trying to take my massive hordes of wealth away from me, 2Human? Do you really think you can defeat me? This is what I mean by it being nothingy, you barely have to do anything. There's barely a penalty for dying, and when I actually tried to not die and played the game seriously and everything, it ended up worse. Why should I play the game? The levels are completely linear too, so you just walk, hold a button, walk, hold a button. It's not, like, annoying to go through, but I couldn't play it for more than an hour at a time, and even in that time I have to have something on, like a YouTube video or something. It was just completely mind-numbing. There isn't that much actively wrong with the combat, but the only thing I like about it is that there's this one enemy who you can target different parts of, and they take damage individually. Like if you shoot his arm will fall off and he'll lose the weapon on it. This is only one enemy though, the rest are just kind of like a blob of damage. Apart from that though, the only thing I like is the obvious brain juice stuff. Like, I like when I got good items because the game said they're good, but that's just a thing with the fact it's an ARPG. It's not a good ARPG though. I find it sits in a weird middle ground between the RPG focused and action focused ARPGs, where your playstyle isn't that customizable but the combat isn't very flashy or interesting, with most of the weapons feeling the same. At least the ARPG aspect comes through from enemy names, like that which vomits diseased brains. I liked him, he was cool. And this is all on top of a game that's already pretty janky. Sounds are missing, there's a new game plus but it doesn't tell you, no subtitles for a lot of audio. I had a whole cutscene play with no voices, and the performance, at least on Xbox 360, is pretty bad. That last point has a weird note next to it though that I want to bring up. I played for a few hours of this game on the 360 because I assumed it wasn't backwards compatible on the Xbox One. However, surprisingly it is. Not only that, but it runs fine with no issues. And apparently it's free on the Xbox Store on Xbox One? This is odd, but yeah, if you for some reason want to play this game, then play it on the Xbox One, because not only is it free, but it runs way better. It's not that the presentation is all awful. I think the Aesir stuff, where they mixed Norse mythology and sci-fi, is pretty well done. It's just you don't see it so much because you spend most of the game in areas like this that just feel a bit uninspired. See, it's things like this that confuse me about this game. Why have they built this interesting, well-designed world only for you to not see it? How did so many people work on this game only for it to fail at even having interesting core gameplay? And how did between 60 and 100 million create a janky and unpolished feeling game? Well, it's all to do with those 9 years and even a little after that. This is 2Human, right? Well, this is also 2Human. You may notice that everything is completely different, apart from that the main character is still bald because, well, you know, balder. I'll get to why they're so different in a bit, but right now, this is 2Human. The idea for it was conceived in 1994, but wouldn't be worked on until after Silicon Knights released Blood Omen: Legacy of Kain. Which, while I'd say the Legacy of Kain series is better known for the Soul Reaver games Silicon Knights had seemingly no part in, Blood Omen has a fairly sizable fanbase and gave Silicon Knights the attention they needed to do something big. And with this attention, 2Human was announced in 1999 and given more details at E3 that year. You would have played as John Franks, an undercover police officer whose investigation into the death of another officer leads him into a rabbit hole of high-tech corporate espionage. It was going to be about technology augmenting humans and the philosophical implications behind that. Character upgrades would come through these augmentations, and you'd have multiple pathways depending on how your character was augmented. This might sound familiar. Yeah, this was Human Revolution. Human Revolution before even the first Deus Ex game, which is wild, but even though these two games were weirdly similar, they weren't the exact same. From what I can tell, 2 Human was originally more of an adventure third-person shooter with RPG elements rather than a straight-up RPG. It also seems to more straightforwardly put augmentations in a bad light, with PlayStation Magazine saying that the assumption is that these technological improvements come at the cost of Frank's humanity. However, this article also says the game was releasing early in the year 2000. What? So this version of 2 Human was nearing the alpha stages of development and only needed a few more months to be completed. However, that didn't happen, with Nintendo acquiring an exclusive partnership with Silicon Knights, meaning 2 Human was moved over to the GameCube. This version of the game was apparently shown off as an FMV at Space World 2000. I say apparently because I can't actually find any footage of it, however I did find multiple pieces of concept art for this version which look... It's very clearly the same game as the PS1 version. Maybe Silicon Knights would have expanded on it further, however this version didn't get very far, as Silicon Knights went on to focus on other projects such as Eternal Darkness and Metal Gear Solid Twin Snakes. With these games in development, the GameCube version of 2 Human essentially became vaporware and just kind of vanished. That was until 2005 when the game reappeared. Kind of. The game reappeared in the form of this trailer, which as you can see is much closer to the final version. The more cyberpunk worlds was replaced with its merge of sci-fi and Norse mythology, however it was keeping its themes of transhumanism. They announced that it was a trilogy, that they were using Unreal Engine 3, and I assume this is the point where the gameplay was also changed to that of an ARPG as well. Even the odd camera controls were decided on at this stage, with 2 Human's director David Diak being fairly confident in them. The game was shown off at E3 2006, where they talked about the camera even more. I can't really think why they were so focused on having no camera controls. I think around this time there was a slight awkwardness with Western games adopting camera controls and Japanese games not doing that. Maybe they were trying to compromise in the middle, but I'm not sure. They had a full gameplay demo at E3 which seemed to earn underwhelming reception, with the more positive articles stating that it shows promise, mostly complaining about performance. However, you may notice that this demo looks incredibly similar to the final version. They promised features such as the cybernetic upgrade system seen in the PS1 version, but this was incredibly stripped down in the final release. They also promised things like factions, but they didn't appear at all. The promising version of 2 Human was also the final version, but it was still delayed for another 2 years. So why didn't they use that time? Well, it's all to do with them using the Unreal Engine 3, because when they adopted it, no games had released using it. They had a contract with Epic Games, saying Silicon Knights would be given builds of the engine as Epic finished them. However, in July of 2007, Silicon Knights sued Epic Games for misleading them with Unreal Engine 3. They claimed they received a working build of Unreal Engine 3 for Xbox 360 a year after the console had released, and even then, they were given no information on how to implement code for their games, and if they changed the engine for it to work, Epic wouldn't support that version. This is all on top of a PS3 version of the engine they still hadn't received, despite it being expected months previously, but I'm thinking that likely took some time because of the bizarre infrastructure of the PS3. Silicon Knights also blamed Epic for 2 Human being delayed from its 2006 release date, saying they faced pressure from its publishing parties to nonetheless move forward with development of its games, and with respect to one of those partners, Microsoft, to complete its game as early as possible in 2007. According to the lawsuit, this cost the company millions in labour and potential profit. Silicon Knights also claimed Epic were able to make a workable version of Unreal Engine 3 for E3 2006 to show off Gears of War, which Epic were developing at the time, but withheld the technology from its partners for its own advantage. When they asked for the updates and engine tweaks that allowed Gears of War to run well, Silicon Knights say it was told those updates were game-specific enhancements not covered by the agreement, as opposed to an engine-level update that would be covered. Silicon Knights claims those partners were stuck with an Xbox 360 engine that was unable to handle multi-core processing, subject to long load times, had inefficient memory usage, and crippling slowdown. The developer also claims that Epic would ignore its requests to correct those problems, unless doing so would also benefit the development of Gears of War. It also said that Epic consistently advised licensees to code things like particle effects in one matter, while at the same time using a completely contradictory method in Gears of War. The suit accuses Epic of a number of misdeeds, including fraud, negligent misrepresentation, intentional interference with contractual obligations, breach of warranty, and unjust enrichment. Silicon Knights were seeking to have the contract between themselves and Epic Games declared null and void, and be refunded all of the money they spent to license Unreal Engine free. The developer also wanted to be awarded punitive damages for the offences they alleged Epic committed. And lastly, the studio was asking that Epic be forced to surrender all profits garnered by Gears of War as a result of misconduct. I feel very fancy talking about all this, with all the fancy words and fancy law things in my fancy law voice, just all this stuff on my gaming YouTube channel. Because of all this stuff with the Unreal Engine, Silicon Knights apparently had to make their own engine, which explains the poor performance of the E3 demo and final release. And while I don't know much about engine creation, and like most things in my life I will never learn, I can assume that it takes a lot of time and money Silicon Knights don't have after starting this lawsuit. Things got worse though when in August 2007, Epic Games countersued Silicon Knights for copyright infringement, breach of contract, and misappropriation of trade secrets, claiming that Silicon Knights' claims were completely unfounded and that Silicon Knights were in fact the ones using Epic for financial gain. In the middle of all this, 2 Human is thrown out there to pretty negative reviews as you'd expect with the troubles it had in development. From here, the 2 Human trilogy was still planned, but in the meantime Silicon Knights tried to work on other projects, with a lot not really getting anywhere. There's 2 I can't find any info on, which are Siren in the Maelstrom and King's Quest. I'm not even sure if that's the Sierra point-and-click King's Quest, there's nothing on these games. Another 2 I could at least get some info on were The Sandman and Silent Hill the Box. The Sandman was a supposed third-person shooter where you would control some kind of dark matter. Not much is known about it, but there is at least some concept art. Silent Hill the Box is similar with only some screenshots and concept art. I don't think it was even pitched to Konami. It might have been the best post-Team Silent Hill game, but judging by Eternal Darkness it would have again not have been very scary. What is with these Silent Hill games? I don't get it. They settled on working on a licensed game to keep them afloat, that being X-Men Destiny, along with Eternal Darkness 2, which they seemed more passionate for. X-Men Legends released in 2011, however with Eternal Darkness 2... In 2012, Epic Games won the lawsuits. The initial claims were very like, oh, they did this, no we didn't, but that engine Silicon Knights made, which was used for 2 Human, that used Unreal Engine free codes, which meant Epic were fairly clearly going to win. Epic asked every copy of 2 Human be destroyed, which meant the 2 Human trilogy plans were scrapped. There's no real point in making a sequel to a game people aren't meant to legally be able to play. The financial trouble meant Eternal Darkness 2 was cancelled, and in the next 2 years the only thing of note was 2 failed Kickstarter campaigns for an Eternal Darkness spiritual successor. In 2014 though, the inevitable happened and Silicon Knights closed for bankruptcy. Yep. What do you want me to say at this point? Like, I know I say every video that I don't have a way to end it, but really, what can I say here? Lots of people lost their jobs making a kinda shit game. Is that what they really dreamt of all those years ago? Anyway, like and subscribe. Like, I can't really twist this into a positive light. I just think 2 Human is a weird and interesting game, and even if the game itself isn't, it held back what could have been a highly regarded development team with years of wasted work. The Silicon Knights story kind of goes against any moral I can give it. Like, they kept being praised for their work, but strived to create that one game they were really passionate about, which, like, it's good advice, you know, go against what people are expecting and do your own thing, but here it went terribly and collapsed the company. Like, it's just not... yeah. So yeah, the moral of the story is don't. I typed that, and then I left for like 5 minutes, and I forgot what I was gonna say, so That's the moral of the story. Don't. Don't be too human. Don't map the combat to the right analog stick, because then lots of people will yell at you on the internet even if it's not that bad, it's just a bit weird. Yeah, the story of Too Human is just kind of like how the industry can destroy good art, which is a shame. And there's nothing really positive to take from it. Huh. Oh, here's a moral actually. Don't support Epic. Like, the Epic Game Store stuff gets a lot of attention, but they also crunch their staff. So, don't. The moral of the story is don't, it turns out. Wow.
I don't think I'll ever live to see a prophet. I don't want to be a locket.